possible to help Trump in that transition? You're there at the State Department, reportedly already. There's someone working to fill those key positions in state and possibly defense as well.
No doubt whatsoever, the ball is rolling on a lot of these selections right now, and some names keep popping up, not just for one position, but for multiple positions. One of the names we keep hearing again and again is Rick Grinnell. Grinnell was the U.S. ambassador to Germany and courted some controversy under the Trump administration for being highly critical of the then German government. Grinnell was also involved in talks and negotiations between the U.S., Serbia, Kosovo, and Israel on a better alignment between Serbia and Kosovo, who continue to be at each other's throats. That was the deal that brought about Kosovan recognition of Israel and vice versa, and also brought about Serbia and Kosovo's recognition of Hezbollah as a terrorist entity. He was key in those negotiations. He's being run up the flagpole for both Secretary of State and potentially National Security Advisor. There are some other names being bandied about for Secretary of State, including Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, about as pro-Israel as you can get. Certainly in Trump's good graces at this point in time, although they had a rivalry 8 years ago when Trump ran. But Rubio has stayed on Trump's good side, which is 90% of the battle when you're dealing with Trump, and his name being floated out there as a potential candidate for Secretary of State. Also being mentioned right now, Robert O'Brien. He was Trump's final national security advisor among many. He's been relied upon by Trump in his post-White House days for guidance, trusted source for Trump on matters of foreign policy, matters of national security, and still very much entrenched within Trump world there. Meanwhile, for Defense Secretary, we learned today Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who would have been a front runner for the Secretary of Defense post, has turned it down. He said he wants to run for a leadership position within the Senate, probably trying to bide his time there and keep a higher media profile, I would imagine, than the Pentagon would allow. So Cotton apparently turning down consideration for the post of Secretary of Defense. That's a big surprise. And Cotton, by the way, a humongous ally of Israel. I don't think there's a day that goes by that he's not involved in the Middle East in some way in a pro-Israel capacity. Other names being thrown out there for multiple positions, possibly Bill Hagerty, senator from Tennessee. He's only in his first term. However, he's kind of jumped up in the ranks pretty quickly in terms of his foreign policy bona fides. He was on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Senate right from the get-go, which is rare for a rookie senator to be able to have that kind of clout. Has stayed enmeshed in foreign policy and is being considered as well for Secretary of State. Somebody, by the way, both looking at as a potential Secretary of State or Defense Secretary, Mike Waltz, congressman from Florida. He's joined us on a number of occasions. Waltz is that rarity that's on the big three committees within the House: Foreign Affairs, Intelligence, and Armed Services. He's a former Green Beret, looked upon very favorably within the House, looked upon very favorably within the Republican caucus, in Trump's good graces as well. And Waltz could be a serious candidate for both of those positions, depending on who the competition is right now. A few other names out there right now. Mike Pompeo for a possible return to a cabinet position. Probably would not be Secretary of State, but maybe Defense Secretary. Remember, he also served as the head of the CIA under Trump, and so he has multiple vantage points for that particular position. Keith Kellogg, who was Trump's executive secretary and chief of staff of his National Security Council. He also served as National Security Advisor to Mike Pence, though that didn't seem to hurt him with Trump. I think that was by mutual consent. Kellogg has been relied upon as well by Trump during his post-White House years for guidance, for counsel, for advice on matters of national security, and he looks to be among the front runners for one of those coveted positions. And by the way, this transition and these selections are being headed up by Howard Lutnick. Lutnick is a major Trump donor, a friend to Trump for a long time now, and among the highest level Jewish donors there are. Lutnick about as pro-Israel as they come. Will that be taken into consideration when these selections are made? I guess it couldn't hurt that he has that particular posture, Kalev.
Right. And, Mike, I think these are all figures that certainly the Israeli government or the current Israeli government would be comfortable with. We don't have any Rex Tillersons there that are less known figures. But is there any way to read about how we're also hearing, for example, as one spokeswoman, Elizabeth Pipko, for the Republicans, saying Donald Trump wants to see these wars wrapped up. We keep hearing that. When he takes office, Brian Hook talking about saying that Donald Trump does not want to see regime change in Iran. Any possible way to read which directions Donald Trump might go in a second term by some of these selections, some of these names being bandied about?
It's interesting you bring that up because you look at a character like Rick Grinnell. He has been much more toward the Trump isolationist wing than I think a lot of those other characters, a lot of those other veterans within the Trump administration are. He has been going against the grain from most of the Republican Party on matters of Ukraine. He's pitched, possibly establishing an autonomous zone in eastern Ukraine, which the Ukrainian government is dead set against. So he's been much more in line with Trump when it comes to matters of policy within Europe, specifically with Ukraine and Russia. Most of the other names we're talking about, Robert O'Brien, Mike Pompeo, names like that, much more in line with the more traditional Republican views on foreign policies in terms of when to use diplomacy and when to use force. So I'm not so sure this White House is going to be stacked with those hardcore isolationists like one might expect. I think we're going to have a mix maybe of some of the newer people who fall in line with Trump on matters of staying out of wars essentially at all costs, and those more traditional Republicans that have been in the establishment now for decades, who've been more toward the orthodoxy. By the way, one other thing, Kalev, one name that's being thrown out there right now, since we're at the State Department, for ambassador to the United Nations is Elise Stefanik. I just saw a letter from Stefanik, 45 minutes ago, saying that she's running for House Republican leadership. But at the same time, I think she's keeping her options open to become ambassador to the United Nations. Stefanik, again, very pro-Israel in her policies, in her rhetoric, gives constant statements about what she feels is the Biden administration's disalliance, if you can call it that, with Israel. So I think Stefanik, in the mold of maybe a Nikki Haley, would be a good proponent for Israel at the United Nations. But sure, again, just a name being thrown out there right now.
Right, and of course she led the charge against universities allowing these anti-Israel, anti-Semitic protests on campus. So she would be certainly welcomed by the Jewish community there in the U.S. Mike Wagenheim there at the State Department. Thank you for that.